She had one meal left, and she gave it away to 3 lives that everyone else had already abandoned. The frozen winds of Frostvale Kingdom carried those words through the silent forest, though no one was there to hear them. Emma Caldwell stood alone beneath the gray winter sky, holding a small piece of bread in her hands. It was not much. It was the only food she had saved for herself after 3 long days of struggling through the cold. For most people, it would have been a simple meal. For Emma, it was the difference between going to sleep hungry or having enough strength to continue another day. But then she heard the quiet sounds coming from beneath the old pine trees. Hidden near the edge of the forest were 3 young wolf pups, weak from hunger and too afraid to come closer. Emma stopped walking. She knew the stories people told about wolves. She knew the warnings passed from village to village. But when she looked at those small creatures, she did not see a danger. She saw lives that needed help. She slowly approached and lowered herself to the snowy ground. "It is okay," she whispered. "I know you are scared." The pups watched her carefully. They did not know that the young Omega standing before them had spent her entire life being misunderstood too. Emma Caldwell was not someone the world noticed. In Frostvale Kingdom, Omegas without powerful families were often treated as if they were invisible. They were considered too gentle for leadership and too ordinary to matter. Emma had learned to live quietly, working small jobs in the village and accepting that most people would never see beyond her status. But she never allowed the way others treated her to change the way she treated the world. She believed kindness still mattered, even when nobody rewarded it. Looking at the hungry pups, Emma made a choice. She broke her last piece of bread into smaller pieces and placed it gently in front of them. The pups slowly moved closer. Emma smiled as they ate, even though her own stomach reminded her that she had given away everything she had. She did not regret it. She never knew that far beyond the forest, in the grand halls of Silvercrest Palace, someone powerful was searching for those same 3 pups. Alpha King Alexander Vaughn had spent days looking for the missing members of his royal wolf line. The kingdom knew them as important creatures connected to the Alpha bloodline. But Emma knew none of that. She did not know their identity. She did not know that the lives she saved belonged to the most powerful family in the realm. She only knew that they were hungry. And she could not walk away. Deep within Alexander's heart existed the ancient beast instinct that every alpha carried. It was a force built on protection and awareness. When the beast sensed that the royal pups were no longer alone, it became restless. Something had changed. Someone had found them. Someone had chosen them over herself. As Alexander followed the hidden connection leading toward the forest, he expected to discover someone seeking a reward. He expected someone who wanted the attention of the crown. But what he found was completely different. A young Omega with empty hands was sitting in the snow, watching over 3 wolf pups as if they were the most precious lives in the world. And for the first time in many years, the beast inside the Alpha King became completely silent, as if it had recognized something before he did. Something rare. Something unforgettable. A heart that gave everything, even when it had almost nothing left. The snow continued to fall softly over the forest as Emma Caldwell sat beside the 3 wolf pups, unaware that the most powerful alpha in Frostvale Kingdom was approaching. She had no idea that the small creatures resting near her were connected to the royal bloodline. She did not know that her simple act of kindness had already reached the attention of the Alpha King. To Emma, they were not symbols of power. They were simply hungry lives that needed someone to care. As the last piece of bread disappeared, Emma looked at the pups with a gentle smile. Her own hunger remained, but she pushed it aside. "You needed it more than I did," she whispered. The words were quiet, but they carried a strength that could not be measured by wealth or status. A few moments later, the sound of footsteps reached the clearing. Emma turned and saw a man standing at the edge of the trees. He wore a dark winter cloak marked with the silver emblem of Silvercrest Palace. Even without knowing him personally, Emma immediately understood who he was. The calm authority in his presence made it clear. Alpha King Alexander Vaughn had arrived. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Alexander looked at the scene before him. The 3 royal wolf pups were safe. They were calm. And the person responsible was an Omega who looked as if she had not eaten in days. He had expected many possibilities. He expected someone who would demand a reward. Someone who would use the situation to gain attention from the crown. But he found someone who had given away her final meal without knowing who she was helping. You knew what they were? Alexander asked. Emma shook her head. No, her answer was simple. I only knew they were hungry. Those words surprised him. In the palace, every action usually carried a purpose. People often helped because they wanted something in return. But Emma had no reason to pretend. She did not even know there was anyone important to impress. Inside Alexander, the ancient beast remained unusually quiet. The instinct that had always guided him through danger was focused on something else. It sensed the truth behind Emma's actions. It recognized that her kindness was not an act. It was who she was. Alexander stepped closer, carefully observing the situation. You gave them your only food. Emma looked down at the snow. They needed it. And you? He asked. Emma hesitated for a moment before answering honestly. I will find something tomorrow. Alexander noticed the way she said it. There was no complaint. No attempt to make him feel guilty. Just acceptance. That was what affected him the most. Emma had nothing to prove, yet she had shown more courage than many people who stood before the throne every day. As members of the royal guard arrived behind Alexander, they immediately recognized the pups and understood their importance. The atmosphere changed as everyone realized what had happened. The Omega everyone overlooked had protected the future of the Alpha bloodline without even knowing it. But Emma seemed confused by their reactions. She looked at Alexander and quietly asked, Are they safe now? Not once did she ask what she would receive. Not once did she ask who would remember her name. Alexander felt something shift inside him. For years, people had tried to earn his approval through power and ambition. Yet this young Omega had earned his respect through a single choice made in the cold forest. As the Alpha King looked at Emma, he realized something he had never expected. The person who had given away everything she had was the person who had shown him the greatest kind of strength. And the beast inside him had already reached the same conclusion. The journey back to Silvercrest Palace began beneath a quiet winter sky, but inside Alpha King Alexander Vaughn's mind, everything felt different. He had entered the forest searching for 3 missing royal wolf pups. He had expected a simple rescue mission, a task that required only duty and responsibility. Instead, he discovered something he never expected. He discovered an Omega who gave away the last thing she had without knowing anyone would ever notice. Emma Caldwell walked beside the royal guards, still confused by the attention surrounding her. She kept looking toward the 3 pups to make sure they were comfortable. She did not look at the palace banners. She did not look at the guards standing in respect. She did not seem impressed by the power surrounding her. Alexander noticed this immediately. In his world, people often changed when they stood near the crown. They became careful with their words. They measured every action. They searched for opportunities. But Emma remained exactly the same person she was in the forest. She was gentle, honest, and completely unaware that she had already changed the way the Alpha King saw the world. During the journey, Alexander finally asked the question that had stayed in his mind. Why did you help them? Emma looked surprised. Because they needed help. Even though you needed the food yourself? He asked. Emma was quiet for a moment. Then she answered softly. I know what it feels like when nobody notices that you are struggling. Those words reached deeper than she realized. Alexander had spent years surrounded by people, yet very few truly understood the weight he carried. Everyone saw the crown. Everyone saw the strength. Almost no one saw the person behind it. When they arrived at Silvercrest Palace, the entire kingdom learned that the royal wolf pups had been found. But the story that captured attention was not only about their return. It was about the Omega who protected them. The palace halls filled with whispers. Some were curious. Some were doubtful. Many wondered why an ordinary Omega had been the one to discover the missing members of the royal line. Emma noticed the looks and lowered her eyes. She was familiar with being judged. She had spent her entire life feeling like she had to prove that she deserved kindness. But Alexander saw something different. He saw someone who never once asked to be recognized. That evening, he invited Emma to the royal gardens. The snow-covered paths were quiet, giving them a rare moment away from the attention of the palace. "You understand that many people will not immediately accept what happened," Alexander said. Emma nodded. "I know." "Does that bother you?" he asked. She looked at the frozen flowers beneath the snow. "It does not feel good. But I cannot force people to see my heart." Alexander listened carefully. Her answer was not bitter. It was simply honest. She had experienced rejection, yet she had not allowed it to make her cruel. The beast inside Alexander remained calm as he stood near her. It was a feeling he had never experienced before. The ancient instinct within him had always responded to challenges, threats, and uncertainty. But around Emma, it felt something else. It felt peace. Later that night, Alexander learned more about Emma's life. He discovered that she had spent years helping others while receiving very little in return. She never considered herself special. She only believed that kindness was something everyone deserved. For the first time, the Alpha King questioned a belief he had carried for years. Perhaps the strongest person was not always the one who commanded the room. Perhaps the strongest person was the one who could remain kind even when the world had given them every reason not to be. And as Alexander looked toward the quiet room where Emma rested, he realized that the beast inside him had recognized something before he did. This Omega was not someone who needed to be saved. She was someone who had already shown everyone what true strength looked like. The days following Emma Caldwell's arrival at Silvercrest Palace brought a change that few people expected. The grand halls that once felt distant and unfamiliar slowly became a place where questions began to replace assumptions. Yet Emma still felt like a stranger among the royal walls. She was surrounded by people dressed in fine clothing, surrounded by traditions she did not understand, and surrounded by whispers about why an Omega like her had caught the attention of the Alpha King. But Emma remained the same person Alexander had met in the forest. She did not seek admiration. She did not ask for special treatment. Each morning, she visited the 3 wolf pups and made sure they were comfortable. To her, they were not symbols of the royal family. They were the same frightened creatures she had found beneath the trees. Alexander watched from a distance, noticing every small detail. He noticed how the servants respected her more each day. He noticed how the pups trusted her without hesitation. Most importantly, he noticed that Emma never changed her behavior depending on who was watching. In a world where many people acted differently around power, she remained genuine. One afternoon, Alexander found Emma in the palace courtyard, helping the younger servants organize supplies for the winter season. "You do not have to do this," he said. Emma looked up with a small smile. "I know. But someone needed help." Alexander shook his head slightly. "You always say that." Emma tilted her head. "Because it is usually true." Her simple answer made him smile. He had spent years surrounded by complicated conversations and careful decisions. Yet Emma often answered the most difficult questions with the simplest truths. However, not everyone in the palace welcomed her presence. Some nobles believed an Omega without a powerful family should not stand near the Alpha King. They believed her actions in the forest were kind, but they did not believe they were enough to change her position in society. Emma heard their opinions, but she refused to let them define her. She had already spent years knowing what it felt like to be underestimated. The difference now was that she no longer believed their judgment was the truth. Alexander noticed the quiet strength she carried. One evening, he found her standing near the palace balcony, looking over the lights of Silvercrest. "You heard what they said," he said. Emma nodded. Yes. And you are not angry? He asked. She thought carefully before answering. I am sad that people can decide who someone is without knowing them. But I do not want their misunderstanding to change who I am. Those words stayed with Alexander long after the conversation ended. The beast inside him reacted differently whenever Emma spoke. It did not feel the need to protect her because it thought she was weak. It wanted to stand beside her because it recognized her strength. That realization surprised him. For so long, Alexander believed his role was to protect everyone around him. But Emma showed him that protection was not always about standing in front of someone. Sometimes it was about standing beside them. Meanwhile, the truth about the 3 wolf pups continued spreading through the kingdom. More people began asking how an unknown Omega had discovered them first. The answer was simple, yet it changed everything. Emma had not found them because she was searching for power. She found them because she was willing to notice what others ignored. As Alexander looked toward the future, he realized the kingdom was beginning to change. But the greatest change was happening within himself. The Alpha King who once measured strength through control was beginning to understand a different kind of power. The power of compassion. The power of a heart that chose kindness even when nobody was watching. The days in Silvercrest Kingdom continued to pass, but the story of Emma Caldwell spread farther with each sunrise. What began as a simple act of kindness in a frozen forest had become something the entire kingdom was beginning to discuss. Yet Emma remained unaware of how much her actions had changed the way people viewed the world around them. She still woke early each morning. She still visited the 3 wolf pups before anything else. She still believed that caring for others was not something extraordinary. It was simply the right thing to do. Alexander Vaughn watched this with growing admiration. He had spent his entire life surrounded by people who wanted to be seen by the crown. But Emma was different. She had stood in front of the most powerful person in the kingdom with nothing to offer except her honesty. She had not known the pups belonged to the royal family. She had not known her choice would change her life. She had only seen 3 hungry lives that needed help. One afternoon, Alexander invited Emma to walk through the palace gardens. The winter flowers were beginning to bloom beneath the melting snow, creating a quiet beauty throughout the grounds. Do you ever wish things had been different? Alexander asked. Emma looked at him with curiosity. Different how? If you had been born into a powerful family. If people had respected you from the beginning. Emma looked across the garden and thought carefully. Maybe life would have been easier. But I do not think it would have made me who I am. Alexander listened closely. What do you mean? Emma smiled softly. The difficult moments taught me to notice when others were struggling. If I had never felt invisible, maybe I would not have understood what it means to truly see someone. Her answer stayed with him. Alexander had always viewed hardship as something people needed to overcome and leave behind. But Emma showed him that difficult experiences could also create compassion. Meanwhile, the royal council continued debating Emma's place within the palace. Some members respected her actions, while others believed an Omega without noble heritage should not influence royal matters. When Alexander heard these discussions, he did not respond with anger. Instead, he asked a simple question. If someone's kindness saves lives, does their family name matter more than their character? The council had no easy answer. The question forced them to consider something they had ignored for years. A person's value could not always be measured by status. As the weeks passed, Emma's presence slowly changed the atmosphere of Silvercrest. Servants felt comfortable speaking with her. Guards respected her humility. Even those who once doubted her began to notice the qualities Alexander had seen from the beginning. One evening, Alexander returned to the courtyard and found Emma sitting beside the wolf pups. They were no longer frightened or weak. They had grown stronger because of the care she had given them. She smiled as they rested peacefully nearby. You are happy they are better, Alexander said. Emma nodded. Of course. That is all I wanted. Nothing else? He asked. Emma looked confused. What else would there be? Alexander realized that this was the reason she was different. She had never helped because she wanted a place beside the throne. She had never expected recognition. She had simply acted according to her heart. The beast inside Alexander remained calm as he stood near her. It no longer saw Emma as someone who needed protection. It recognized her as someone worthy of standing beside the Alpha King. But while the kingdom slowly began accepting the truth about Emma, a hidden secret from the royal archives was about to reveal why the 3 wolf pups had been so important. And when that truth emerged, everyone would finally understand just how extraordinary Emma's choice had been. The hidden truth inside the royal archives had remained untouched for many years, waiting for someone willing to search beyond the stories everyone already believed. When the ancient documents were finally brought before Alpha King Alexander von, he understood that the discovery was not only about the 3 wolf pups. It was about the history of Silvercrest Kingdom itself. The records revealed that the royal wolf line carried a rare connection to the oldest Alpha traditions. The 3 pups were not simply important because of their royal heritage. They represented the future of a legacy that had protected the kingdom for generations. But what surprised Alexander most was not the importance of the pups. It was the fact that Emma Caldwell had protected them without knowing any of this. She had not seen a royal symbol. She had not seen a future responsibility. She had only seen 3 lives that needed kindness. When Alexander shared the discovery with Emma, she listened quietly. "So they were important all along," she said. Alexander nodded. "Yes. But you did not know that when you helped them." Emma looked toward the pups resting peacefully nearby. "Would it have changed anything?" she asked. Alexander paused. The honest answer was clear. If Emma had known their identity, the decision would have carried a different meaning. But she had helped them before knowing their value. That was what made her choice so rare. "No," Alexander finally said. "And that is exactly why it matters." As the news spread through Silvercrest, more people began to understand the truth about Emma. She was not special because she had helped members of the royal family. She was special because she would have done the same thing for anyone. Her kindness had never depended on status. It had never depended on reward. It came from who she was. However, not everyone accepted the changes happening within the kingdom. Some nobles still struggled with the idea that an Omega without a powerful background had influenced the Alpha King's decisions. They believed tradition should remain unchanged. Emma heard these concerns, but she refused to let them make her bitter. She knew that changing hearts took time. She had spent years waiting for people to see her differently. Now she understood that others needed the same patience. One evening, Alexander found Emma near the royal gardens, watching the wolf pups play beneath the winter sky. "You are not angry at the people who doubted you?" he asked. Emma smiled gently. "I was once like them." Alexander looked surprised. "What do you mean?" "I used to believe that someone's value came from what others thought of them. It took me years to understand that a person's worth exists before anyone recognizes it." Her words remained in his mind. Alexander had spent his life learning how to lead others, but Emma continued teaching him lessons no book could provide. The beast inside him had always represented instinct, strength, and protection. But now Alexander understood something deeper. True strength was not only the ability to protect others. It was the ability to remain kind when the world gave you reasons not to be. As the kingdom prepared to celebrate the return of the royal wolf pups, Alexander knew the moment would change everything. The people would finally see the truth about Emma's choice. But he also realized something personal. The Omega who had entered his life as a stranger had become someone he could no longer imagine his future without. The celebration of the royal wolf pups became one of the most memorable days in Silvercrest Kingdom. The palace that once echoed with questions now filled with a different feeling. People gathered not only to welcome the return of the royal line but also to honor the Omega whose kindness had changed the course of history. Emma Caldwell stood quietly among the crowd, still feeling surprised that so many people wanted to hear her story. She had never thought of herself as someone important. She had never searched for attention. Yet the kingdom now looked at her as an example of courage and compassion. Alexander von watched her from across the courtyard and remembered the first moment he saw her in the snow. She had been cold, hungry, and alone, yet her first thought was not about herself. That memory stayed with him because it revealed something he had spent years trying to understand. True strength was not always found in power. Sometimes it was found in the smallest choices made when nobody was watching. During the ceremony, Alexander spoke before the people of Silvercrest. He did not speak only about the royal wolf pups. He spoke about the lesson Emma had unknowingly given the entire kingdom. We often search for greatness in titles, bloodlines, and strength, he said. But sometimes greatness is found in a person who chooses kindness when there is nothing to gain. The crowd listened carefully. Many remembered how they once overlooked omegas like Emma. They remembered how quickly they judged people based on status instead of character. Slowly, the kingdom began to understand that the greatest mistake was not failing to recognize power. It was failing to recognize kindness. After the ceremony, Emma walked through the palace gardens with Alexander. The quiet path gave them a moment away from the attention of the kingdom. "You seem different," Emma said. Alexander smiled. "Different from when we met?" She nodded. "You were searching for answers then. Now you seem like you already found one." Alexander looked toward the garden where the winter flowers were beginning to open. "I found many answers. But the most important one was that a leader should never stop learning." Emma smiled softly. "That is something many people forget." They continued walking, and Alexander realized how much his life had changed since the day he entered the forest. He once believed his duty was to stand above everyone and carry every burden alone. But Emma had shown him another way. A true leader did not always stand above others. Sometimes the strongest position was standing beside them. The beast inside Alexander had changed as well. The ancient instinct that once responded only to strength and protection now recognized something deeper. It recognized trust. It recognized warmth. It recognized the rare bond created by someone who cared without expecting anything in return. As the evening arrived, Alexander and Emma returned to the place where the wolf pups rested. They were no longer the frightened creatures Emma had found beneath the trees. They were healthy, happy, and surrounded by care. Emma smiled as she watched them. "I am glad they found their way home," she whispered. Alexander looked at her. "So am I." But he knew he was not only talking about the wolf pups. He was talking about himself as well. Before Emma entered his life, he had everything a person could want. A crown. A kingdom. Power. Yet something was missing. He had forgotten the importance of compassion. Emma had reminded him. She had shown him that a person's greatest gift was not what they could take from the world, but what they were willing to give. And as the stars appeared above Silvercrest, Alexander knew the story that began in a frozen forest was not just about 3 lost wolf pups. It was about a choice that revealed the true meaning of strength. The days after the celebration brought a new sense of hope throughout Silvercrest Kingdom. The story of Emma Caldwell was no longer whispered as a strange event that happened in a distant forest. It became a reminder that a single choice could change the hearts of many people. Yet Emma remained humble. She continued living the same way she always had, caring for others, listening when people needed support, and never allowing attention to change who she was. Alexander von noticed this more than anyone. As the Alpha King, he had spent years surrounded by people who measured every action by influence and reward. But Emma never asked what she would receive. She never looked at the crown and wondered what it could give her. She simply followed what she believed was right. One morning, Alexander invited Emma to visit the village outside the palace walls. He wanted the people to see that the Omega who changed the kingdom was not someone distant or unreachable. She was still the same person who had walked through the snow with nothing but kindness in her heart. As they arrived, many villagers gathered around. Some remembered the days when they had ignored Emma. Some remembered how they had underestimated her because of her status. but now they saw something different. They saw the person behind the rumors. An elderly villager approached Emma and quietly apologized. "I judged you before I knew you," she said. "I thought someone without power could not make a difference." Emma smiled gently. "Many people believe that. But everyone has the ability to make a difference through their choices." Those words touched the villagers because they realized Emma was not seeking revenge or demanding recognition. She simply wanted people to understand each other better. Later that afternoon, Alexander and Emma walked near the edge of the village. The peaceful fields reminded Emma of the life she had before the palace. "Do you miss it?" Alexander asked. Emma looked across the landscape. "Sometimes. It was simple." "And now?" he asked. She smiled. "Now it is different. But different does not always mean worse." Alexander looked at her thoughtfully. He had noticed that Emma never held on to the past with sadness. She carried her experiences with gratitude, even the difficult ones. That was another reason he admired her. She had every reason to become cold, yet she chose warmth. She had every reason to stop caring, yet she continued helping others. As the seasons changed, the relationship between Alexander and Emma became stronger. The kingdom noticed that the Alpha King who once appeared distant had become more open and understanding. His decisions reflected the lessons he had learned from the Omega who entered his life unexpectedly. The beast inside him had changed too. It no longer reacted only to threats or challenges. It had learned the value of trust and compassion. One evening, Alexander returned to the forest where he first found Emma with the wolf pups. The place looked different now. It was no longer a place of uncertainty. It was where everything had begun. Emma stood beside him, looking at the trees covered in silver moonlight. "Funny how one moment can change an entire future," she said. Alexander smiled. "I used to think the future was something a king had to control." He looked at her. "Now I know sometimes the most important moments are the ones we never planned." Emma looked toward the quiet forest. She remembered the day she gave away her last piece of food. She remembered thinking she was only helping 3 hungry lives. She never imagined that choice would reach a kingdom, change a king, and reveal a truth about strength that people had forgotten. But the journey was not finished yet. One final decision remained, and it would determine not only the future of Silvercrest, but the place Emma would hold in the heart of the Alpha King. The final decision that awaited Silvercrest Kingdom was not about power, wealth, or tradition. It was about recognizing the person who had changed everything without ever asking for anything in return. For many years, the kingdom had believed that greatness belonged only to those born into influence. But one winter day in a quiet forest, an Omega named Emma Caldwell had proven that the strongest hearts could come from the most unexpected places. As the seasons changed, the people of Silvercrest watched their kingdom transform. The old beliefs that once separated people by status slowly began to fade. They learned that kindness was not a weakness. They learned that compassion was not something to overlook. And they learned that a person's worth was never decided by where they came from. Alexander Vaughn stood before the kingdom on a bright morning beneath the silver banners of Silvercrest Palace. The entire realm gathered to hear his announcement. Many expected him to speak only about royal matters and future responsibilities. Instead, he spoke about a choice made by someone who had no reason to believe anyone would remember her. "A kingdom is not built only by those who hold power," Alexander said. "It is built by those who choose to do what is right, even when nobody is watching." His eyes turned toward Emma, who stood quietly among the people. She still felt surprised by the attention. She had never wanted a place beside the throne. She had never dreamed of becoming someone important. She had only wanted to help 3 hungry lives in the snow. But that simple choice revealed the kind of person she truly was. Alexander continued, "Emma Caldwell reminded this kingdom that strength is not measured by what someone can take. It is measured by what someone is willing to give." The crowd listened in silence. They remembered the girl who once walked through the village unnoticed. They remembered the Omega they underestimated. And now they saw the woman who had changed their understanding of courage. After the gathering, Alexander and Emma returned to the forest where their journey had begun. The tree stood quietly beneath the morning light, just as they had on the day she found the wolf pups. "Do you ever miss the life you had before all this?" Alexander asked. Emma smiled. "Sometimes. But I do not think I lost that life. I think it helped me become who I am." Alexander looked at her with warmth. "That is what makes you different." Emma looked at him. "And you are different too." He smiled slightly. "Because of you." For a moment, they stood together in the peaceful forest. The Alpha King who once believed he had to carry every burden alone had learned that trust was not a weakness. The Omega who once believed nobody would ever truly see her had learned that her heart had always been valuable. The beast inside Alexander had found peace, not because it became weaker, but because it finally understood what it meant to protect something precious. Years later, the story of Emma Caldwell and Alexander Vaughn continued to be told throughout Silvercrest Kingdom. Children learned that kindness could change the world. Leaders learned that listening was part of true strength. And those who felt unseen learned that their value existed long before anyone recognized it. The journey began with one small piece of food shared beneath the snow. It ended with an entire kingdom discovering a truth they had forgotten. The greatest hearts are often found in those who have the least, yet still choose to give. And that was why Emma Caldwell was remembered forever, not because she stood beside the Alpha King, but because she showed everyone what it truly meant to have a heart strong enough to change the world.